Okay, in this video we'll be looking at the Foreign Teachers Code of Conduct as part of the SDE Teachers 2017-2018 online orientation. We feel it's important to cover certain areas of behavior for China, life in China, working in China, and working with SDE to set certain expectations for how we would like our SDE teachers to behave. And we'll be putting these into a more detailed code of conduct that we'll be sharing with our teachers later on. First of all, let's have a look at the overview for these slides. We'll start by looking at a general overview of life in China and how we would expect our teachers to behave whilst they're living in China. Then more specifically, in any kind of workplace with SDE and with the schools that you'll be teaching with. Then specific aspects of behavior at schools and things that apply purely in the SDE working environment. And then finally, some inverted commas, bad examples, some issues where things have gone a little bit wrong. And hopefully we can share with you the problems and you can understand what our expectations are in those sorts of situations. So firstly, living in China. The first thing, we expect SDE teachers to be legally compliant, so they will adhere to the laws of China. Next would be behavior in public. So even though you may not be at work in the SDE offices or at your school, we would expect you to behave in a respectful and decent and professional way when you're out and about in China to give a good impression of SDE teachers. And this feeds into the final point here about political and cultural sensitivity. It's particularly important that, especially in the online world, which is also part of the public sphere in China, that you are politically and culturally sensitive and that you behave with respect towards other people. In the workplace, whether it be the SDE offices or when communicating with SDE colleagues, or whether it's at school communicating with teachers or working with students, we expect you to show respect to everybody that you come in contact with, regardless of their background, their opinions, or even perhaps when they might not be showing respect to you. We would expect you to behave with integrity and professionalism in this regard, and to always try to behave as you would want other people to behave towards you. The third point here is one of communication and collaboration. We expect our SDE teachers to be open in their communication with the schools and with SDE colleagues, so forthcoming and willing to engage in constructive communication at all times, and to also have a collaborative work ethic where they're always willing to work with others to resolve problems or to help other people, or to work with them to receive what might be their criticism or their guidance to achieve better results for everybody. The fourth point is a point about protection of property. We would always expect SDE teachers to respect what is the property of their school or of SDE, and to do whatever they can to ensure that that property isn't damaged in any way through reckless use or misuse. And this would include situations where you might be living in school property, for example. You might be living on the campus of your school. You might be using facilities that your school has made available to you. We would also expect you to look after that equipment and use it in a sensible way. Finally, this issue of conflict of interest. Any SDE teacher would not be expected to engage in any kind of work that in some way conflicts or opposes their purpose of working with SDE and working with their schools. So an example of this would be to take any kind of part-time work outside of their responsibilities at their school that might in some way interfere with the timetable that they have at their school and interfere with their ability to be available to their school to help their school during working hours. At school, there'll be certain things that you need to focus on in terms of behavior that don't apply across the board. So schools will have their own set of rules that will apply to all of their teachers, and as a teacher at your school you'll be included in those rules, and these will be things like not smoking or drinking on the school premises. Also, it will apply to being present at the school at certain times of day for certain meetings or certain events. For example, a school may have office hours from 8 in the morning until 12 p.m. and from 2 p.m. until 5:30 in the afternoon. And if Chinese teachers are expected to be there during that time, then foreign teachers will be expected to be there during that time as well. So you should make an effort to familiarize yourself with the rules of your school and to comply with them. Also, we would expect teachers to always be punctual with attendance of classes and to make sure that they are ready to teach their classes in advance of the bell, and that they don't cut their classes short before the bell and leave early, and most importantly, that they don't simply miss classes altogether. The next point is about dress code. It would be your responsibility to establish what is the dress code at your school, what is acceptable at your school, and to adhere to that. There may not be clear rules at your school about the dress code, so you may need to take your lead from other teachers or perhaps ask for advice. And it's always a good idea to set your standards above what you might see at your school. So the smarter you dress, the better the impact you're going to have. And again, a point about protection of property, school accommodation, you should make sure that you adhere to the rules of the school. The school may operate a policy of inspecting your accommodation. You should respect that. Understand that it's not intended as an invasion of your privacy. It's just to make sure perhaps that the equipment in your accommodation has no problems, for example. Also, your school may well operate a curfew and expect you to be back in the school before a certain time on a school night. That might be something like 10:30 or 11 every night before school the next day. Working with SDE, the first point about our expectations for your conduct with SDE is knowledge of policies. There will be many different policies that apply to you in your work with SDE and with your school, and we would expect you to be proactive in understanding these policies and applying them and working within them. We will do our best to share them with you and to explain them to you, but you should also be very forthcoming and proactive in making sure that you know them and you understand them. If anything is ever unclear and you're not sure how to apply a certain policy, then we would expect you to come and ask us about that. Ask your specialist, ask your supervisor, ask your manager. In terms of health and safety, we will be putting your health and safety first as a priority. If our teachers aren't healthy and safe, then we have a problem. So we also expect you to do the same thing. Put your health and safety first. Whenever you have any illness, any problems with your health, we really encourage you to come forward and talk to us. If we don't know, there's nothing we can do about it. If you feel unsafe or you have any issues regarding your safety at your school, in your accommodation, or in life in general, again, we strongly encourage you to come forward and talk to us, and we would expect you to do so that we can help you. Again, if we don't know about it, there's nothing we can do. And the same applies with any issues and complaints. We would expect people to be forthcoming, raise these issues as soon as they come to light. That gives us the best opportunity to help you with them. And we'd also expect you to submit these in the appropriate way, first through your specialist and then escalating through the management chain. Within the foreign teachers management team, first through your specialist to your supervisor, your manager, and the director. In this next part, we'll look at what I'm calling bad examples. These are really good examples of how not complying with the code of conduct can result in some big problems when you're living and working in China. The first example is in terms of legal compliance. We had a teacher who worked with us for around about 2 years, and during the first year, partly through his own oversight and partly through not having been picked up by his SDE specialist, he failed to register his residence with the local police station. And as a result, once he moved later in his time with the company, his new specialist at that time said, "Hey, we've got to take you to the local police station and get you registered." So they went along, and when they registered, the police checked him in the system and discovered that in the previous year he hadn't been registered whatsoever. Now, as I was saying before, There may be some leeway when you first register with the police. Whilst the entry card into China says 24 hours, you may find that police stations can tolerate waiting a little bit longer than that. But a whole year, in this case, was totally unacceptable. And to begin with, it looked like he would have to pay a fine in excess of 10,000 renminbi. But after significant effort from his specialist, providing certain documents to the police station and actually spending the best part of 2 days going backwards and forwards with the teacher to the police station agreed to reduce the fine to 2,000 renminbi. So obviously it's quite important to understand what the rules are, understand what is expected, because at the end of the day, the ultimate responsibility in this situation rested with the teacher. The next example is communication. This can really be in any part of your work, and in fact the previous example is an example where the teacher perhaps didn't communicate as clearly as he could have done, didn't ask questions, didn't find out what was required of him, and that had negative consequences. So that was part of the problem. Quite often some teachers will go into their schools and think, I am the teacher here, this is my job, everything that happens between me and the school and everything that I do with the students, with the school, that's my responsibility. I'm going to take care of business. I'm going to get things done. And I don't want to bother other people, or it's not my place to bother other people and ask them for assistance. Well, that's not our expectation. Our expectation is that when you start to struggle, when you start to find things confusing or too challenging, you don't feel that you can handle it, get in touch with us, and we've got a lot of experience and a lot of people who can help you. Now, an example of when this can go wrong, well, actually we've had several examples over the last year. And perhaps the worst example is of a teacher who, because of various issues, but mainly because of friction with their contact teacher over a number of different things, including the way they would discipline their students and the way they taught their class, and a number of cultural differences over humor and the way that people express themselves, this resulted in a breakdown of the communication between the foreign teacher and the contact teacher, which eventually resulted in the foreign teacher saying something that they would later regret, which gave a bad impression to the school and to the other teachers, and also having a night out where they had a few too many drinks and ended up having a very minor crash on their bicycle into a parked car. But the result of this was that the police then had to bring this teacher back to the school with their bicycle, because the teacher was living at the school, and they brought them back to school with the bicycle. And this created a bit of a scene. It created rumors, because this teacher was brought back late at night after hours and had crashed their bicycle, had clearly been drinking. And rumors obviously would have spread about this. The next day, this reached the principal of the school, who heard about the conversations between the foreign teacher and the contact teacher, heard about the drinking, heard about the crash of the bicycle, and heard about the police. And at this stage, decided that the influence was just too negative on the school. Didn't want to hear any explanations. And in this situation, there was very little we could do other than arrange for the teacher to move out. Now, we were able to understand the situation and to accept that honest mistakes were made by the teacher, and he never intended to cause any harm in that situation. But what happened has happened, and as the school is a client in this situation, it's up to us to meet their requests and meet their requirements. And so we had no choice but to comply with their wishes and to change the teacher at the school. And in this case, the teacher did accept that most of the fault lay with them. And I was very encouraging to them to say, in the future, when you have issues like this, you need to share it with us, because if we don't know there's a breakdown of communication between you and the school, and that this situation is festering and getting worse and worse and potentially leading to this kind of regrettable, coming together of events, really a perfect storm that led to him having to leave the school, then there's not very much we can do to help. We'll always be coming around to schools, making visits and talking to you to try to find out how things are going on, but obviously there's limited time available for us to do this. So it's very important that our teachers are forthcoming with communication, sharing their problems with us. The next is conflict of interest. So in terms of conflict of interest, I said before, part-time work that might be during the week or at similar times to when you might be expected to be at school or might be expected to help school. This can obviously cause a conflict between your time, your efforts spent at school, and your own interests in making some extra money in your spare time. So the worst example I've seen of this was a teacher who was actually teaching part-time in his spare time and posting about this through his WeChat. As it was, he had a large number of people from his school on his WeChat, including teachers and students, potentially because he wanted to attract students to come to his part-time classes. But one day he decided that he would take sick leave, and whether or not he was genuinely sick, I honestly don't know. I was just working as a foreign teacher at the time, but I observed all of this unfold on WeChat. He took sick leave, and then later that day, when he was supposed to be off sick, he was recording pictures and messages about his part-time work that he was doing that afternoon. This was then clearly shared with all of the teachers at his school, and there was obviously great criticism of him that he would take time off of work and require other people to cover his classes and then do part-time work when he's supposed to be resting or getting better. So I think you can see there that's possibly the worst example of a conflict of interest that you could have at a school. And in general, we don't expect this kind of behavior from our teachers at all. It's not just a conflict of interest. I think it's just simply unprofessional. The last point I'd like to make in our examples is about school accommodation. If your school provides accommodation, I said there's a possibility that the school might come and inspect it on a regular basis to make sure that all of the facilities are working, everything's in good order. One example we have of things going wrong was a teacher who was just keeping his accommodation in really bad condition. Not cleaning, not tidying up, and there was a problem with the toilet that was resulting in a smell that was spreading through the corridor to adjacent accommodation where other teachers in the school were staying. And we received several complaints about this, and we went with the school to inspect. Pictures were taken and were shared with the teacher, and the teacher was given an ultimatum that they would have to change their behavior and to clean up the accommodation. Otherwise, they would not be allowed to stay with the school any longer. Now, we simply don't expect things to get to this level. We hadn't anticipated that we would need to be proactive in inspecting teachers' accommodation, and we hope that we won't have to do this in the future. So we want to make it very clear at this stage, we expect people to look after the school accommodation that they stay in and to respect it, and also to keep it clean, to keep it in a state that anybody else would be happy to move into. And any of the facilities or equipment that you're provided within the school accommodation and within the school in general should be respected in the same way. Should be left in a state that other people are able to use it. Okay, so those are some important examples. I mean, maybe many more, but it should give you an idea of what we expect in terms of your attitude towards living and working and teaching with SDE in China. Up next, we're going to focus on education in Shenzhen. As part of that, we'll be looking at the experience of teaching in a Chinese school.